LSU absolutely can make it to the college football playoff this year. But the same things that could propel them there are also the same things that can hold them back.
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast. Plus, you can find us on YouTube as well. Just search Locked On LSU in the search bar on YouTube and then hit that subscribe button, and you won't miss a single second of your Locked On LSU content. My name is Caroline Fenton, and I am your host, as I am every single day. I always appreciate y'all for being here. I always appreciate y'all for liking, commenting, subscribing, reviewing, all that good stuff. Appreciate you for being here. Appreciate you for listening. Appreciate you for interacting with the podcast. And always appreciate you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. You can follow me on Twitter at Caroline Fenton1. You can follow along the podcast at Locked On LSU. So I was browsing around ESPN.com today, and I found an article from Heather Dinich, who, of course, is like the college football playoff queen. She has a lot of connections within the committee. She has, wonderful college football knowledge, great expertise about the playoff and the college football world as a whole. She wrote an article with the headline, College Football Playoff Candidates to Reach their First College Football Playoff. And I thought that was interesting. And I was like, it doesn't apply to LSU, but I wanted to see what she had to say. Teams that she thought could make the College Football Playoff for the first time. And USC, Tennessee, Penn State, those were all teams that were thrown in there. And those, I think, are all very fair candidates to make the CFP for the first time, considering that USC was just a win over Utah away from making the CFP. If Tennessee hadn't lost to South Carolina, one of the last few games of the season, they probably would have made their way to the college football playoff. Penn State, they're always going to be in there. Penn State's like perpetually that team that always wins like 9 or 10 games, but can never really get past the Michigans, the Ohio States, the Big Ten. But I digress. All fair points, all very fair candidates. But the second half of that article was the teams that are most likely to come back for the second time. So teams that have made the college football playoff one time before, but haven't made their way back. LSU fit in that category per Heather Dinich. This is what she wrote about LSU. The biggest reason for optimism: 10 offensive starters who beat Alabama and won the SEC West under Brian Kelly return. I think that is one very key thing. She mentions players, and I'll even expand that all the way out to the coaching staff as well. LSU finds itself in a unique position within the SEC that LSU returns both coordinators and a starting quarterback. There's only 2 teams in the SEC that return both. LSU is one of them, and Vanderbilt is the other. If you look at preseason, kind of the consensus top 4 teams in the SEC, 4 of the top 10 preseason college football poll teams, Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, LSU, in no particular order. LSU is the only team of those 4, of the 4 consensus top teams in the SEC, that returns both an offensive coordinator and a quarterback. Alabama's replacing their offensive coordinator, Bill O'Brien, and they're going to be replacing Bryce Young. Georgia's replacing Todd Monken, their offensive coordinator, and they're replacing Stetson Bennett. Tennessee is replacing Alex Golesh, their offensive coordinator, and their starting quarterback, Hendon Hooker. LSU brings back both. So I think it's continuity on the field, player continuity. Some of your biggest playmakers offensively will be returning, plus some of your coaching staff. Of course, we broke down Jamar Cain leaving yesterday. I mentioned some candidates both in-house and out-of-house. You can find that on your preferred podcast platform. You can find that on YouTube if you want to get up to speed on the latest on the Jamar Cain situation. But I mean, if that's really the biggest of our worries in the offseason, I'm not going to undermine Jamar Cain's influence on the team and importance of the team. But if you want to compare that to the rest of college football, I mean, heck, Tennessee, I can't get my team straight today. Alabama's replacing both of their coordinators. So, losing Jamar Cain absolutely is a hit, but in comparison to the rest of the SEC, it seems like LSU is in a better position than most. So continuity on the field and continuity on the sideline as well. Heather Dinich mentions the biggest hurdle for LSU, and that is winning on the road. And I think that that's a very, very fair point. I think it's a fair point that always is relevant within the SEC. And that is one thing that I think could propel LSU either to the to the college football playoff or could hold them back. That's number one for me is the schedule. Heather Dinich writes, the winning on the road is the biggest hurdle. LSU opens its season in Orlando against Florida State. Coincidentally, Florida State is also on this list of teams that can make a comeback into the college football playoff. In the current construction of the college football playoff, a 14 playoff, the last year, the 14 playoff, I don't see both Florida State and LSU both getting to the college football playoff. And look, I could be wrong. The loser of that game could win a conference championship, and that's probably as good of a resume as anyone, especially if that other team that beat them, like let's say, for example, LSU beats Florida State. I'm putting the good juju out there in the universe. If LSU beats Florida State week 1 and then LSU wins out, which would be, hell yeah, that'd be awesome. LSU's going to the college football playoff. If Florida State's only loss, they lose to LSU and then they win out the rest of their season. If Florida State's only loss is to LSU, a team that went undefeated throughout the season, and this is all hypothetical, they're probably both getting in. But I don't really know if I necessarily see that happening to either school. Winning, like losing the first game, then winning out, or winning out in the season in its entirety. Each school has an absolute gauntlet of the schedule. So I don't see that being very likely, but that is the most likely path to each of those schools getting into the college football playoff. So I would say week 1, you're starting off your season with one of the biggest tests on your schedule, and also could potentially be one of your biggest barriers to getting into the college football playoff. But it doesn't get any easier because Heather Dinich mentions how LSU also has to go on the road at Alabama this year. Bryant-Denny is not a very forgiving or easy place to play, nor is Alabama a very easy team to play. I wouldn't be surprised to see Alabama take a little bit of a step back this year, or maybe have a similar season to last year where they're good, not elite. Because just like I said, they're replacing Bryce Young, who I thought was the best quarterback in college football this past year. Jalen Milroe may fill in that starting role. I saw a little bit of Jalen Milroe this past year when he had to fill in for Bryce Young whenever Bryce Young went down with a shoulder injury against Arkansas. Jalen Milroe, to me, at least where that point of his development was, didn't look like he was shaping up to be the top quarterback in college football. And then they also have to replace Bill O'Brien, also have to replace Pete Golding and their offensive and defensive coordinators, respectively. Nick Saban has proved that it doesn't matter what happens, whether the rules change, the quarterbacks change, the coordinators change, he can still win. So maybe I'm selling Alabama a little bit short, but still, that's going to be a massive test, whether they have to replace all their coordinators and their quarterback or not. Alabama is going to be a tough team to play. You got to play them on the road. Now, where I disagree with Heather Dinich a little bit is she points out traveling to Mississippi State, traveling to Ole Miss, and traveling to Missouri. I don't want to discredit any team in the SEC. This is a difficult league for a reason. Those games don't instill the fear of God in me. You can lose any game on any week on any given Saturday, but Starkville's not a place that is overly intimidating to me. It's annoying more than anything. Ole Miss isn't a place that's overly intimidating to me. Lane Kiffin is a good coach. Lane Kiffin is building up a really solid program. Lane Kiffin has the most stacked quarterback room in all of college football, but it's not like I look at that game, either of those games, and really, shaking my boots. Same thing with Missouri. I think that LSU has a very favorable SEC East matchup this year. Playing Tennessee last year when Tennessee was the team that they were, not a super favorable matchup whenever Brian Kelly is coming into year 1. But playing Missouri as your East draw, that doesn't scare me. It really doesn't. I don't believe that Eli Drinkwitz has had a single winning season, or if he hasn't won more than 7 or 8 games throughout his entirety of his career at Missouri. I'll need to pull up the exact stats of it, and also, going to Missouri isn't scary. I am from Missouri. I've been to several Missouri Tigers games in my day. They are quiet, so it's nothing. Those games on the road don't necessarily scare me, but the games against Florida State and Alabama, you're starting off your season with a huge obstacle, and it doesn't get any easier from there. So that's the one obstacle that I see for LSU, either making or not making the college football playoff, is the schedule. I'll get into the rest of the factors. I've got 3 more for you coming up next. But before we do that, I want to tell you about FanDuel. The NCAA tournament is heating up, both men's and women's, and there is no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. That is because right now, FanDuel is giving new customers a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That is up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Just go to fanduel.com/lockedon and sign up today to claim your no sweat first bet. And then you can wager on everything. You got the money line, you got point spreads, you got which team will be cutting down the net at the end of March. All of that on an app that's safe, secure, and is so super easy to use. So don't miss your shot at a no sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to fanduel.com/lockedon to sign up. Make every moment more with FanDuel. Well, thanks again for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Check us out on YouTube as well. Just search Locked On LSU in the YouTube search bar. And then if you hit that subscribe button, then you'll get notified every single day whenever Locked On LSU drops. You won't miss a single second of Locked On LSU content. You'll always stay informed. You'll impress all of your LSU fan friends with how much you have to talk about with the LSU Tigers. But Heather Dinich lists teams that she thinks are most likely to, one, make the college football playoff for the first time, or two, most likely to get back again after not being back for the first time. LSU was on that latter list. Joining LSU on that list of teams that are more likely or most likely to get in for the second time, Florida State, which, nice, you play them week 1. Got no time to ramp things up. Got to come out already at 110%. Washington is on that list as well. So Washington, Florida State, and LSU are the 3 teams that Heather Dinich at least sees as the most likely to make the college football playoff. I think that LSU absolutely can make the college football playoff this year. Why not? I mean, why not? A team that won 10 games last year, 9 games in the regular season, won 10 games overall, beat Alabama, hung more points on Georgia than any other team had at that point in the season in the SEC championship. You go to the SEC championship in Brian Kelly's first season. I mean, if that's now the expectation, then think about the leaps and bounds that you can make in year 2. Why not? Why not LSU? Why can't LSU make it to the college football playoff this year? One reason that I think could either help boost LSU's resume or could hurt LSU is the schedule. You play on the road in Orlando. You play Florida State, which is a team that everyone and their mother is high on. You beat Florida State. That's even better for your resume. And then you go on the road at Alabama. It's not an easy game. You beat Alabama, your resume is that much better for the college football playoff. But there are some other factors. The schedule, you can't control. The schedule, it is what it is. The schedule, you already planned to play Florida State a long time ago, and now it's looking like that maybe is going to be a much tougher game than maybe anticipated. But I think the other factor, looking more inside LSU's walls, can't control the schedule. The first factor is the quarterback. What is Jaden Daniels going to be for LSU this year? We saw a whole lot of good from Jaden Daniels this past season, but we also saw a whole lot of growing pains from Jaden Daniels this past season. We saw Jaden Daniels play absolutely lights out against Ole Miss, Florida, and Alabama in the mid to 3/4 mark of this season this past year. We also saw Jaden Daniels struggle. We saw Jaden Daniels throw for fewer than 100 yards against Auburn. We also saw Jaden Daniels really struggle to get the ball to wide open receivers, even in games that LSU won, like against Mississippi State, for example. In that first half against Mississippi State, Jaden Daniels, it seemed like his eyes were closed and like not even trying to throw the ball to receivers. So those were things that Jaden Daniels had worked on throughout the season because Mississippi State, Florida State, those games were at the beginning of the season, he looked better as time went on. And then you saw the game against Arkansas. And I know it was cold, and I know there was rumors flowing around, or maybe, some speculation that Jaden Daniels had the flu during that game, but still, nonetheless, cold, flu, whatever it might be, Jaden Daniels still didn't perform very well in that game. So what Jaden Daniels are you going to get this season? Are you going to see the Florida, Ole Miss, Alabama Jaden Daniels week in and week out? Are you going to see Jaden Daniels pick up where he left off this past season? So that first few, 4, 5, 6 weeks of the season, it's not getting ramped up and ready. It's not getting acclimated to the offense, to the offensive line, and to your receivers, but you are ready. You know what's expected of you. Can you pick up where you left off and build upon that throughout the offseason, throughout spring, throughout summer camp? Can you build that rapport with your receivers? Can you be even better than you were last year? Can you be even more consistent than you were last year? If Jaden Daniels can do that, that absolutely can propel you to the college football playoff. If we see more inconsistencies from Jaden Daniels, if we see more reluctancy to throw the football or to get the football to wide open receivers, then that could keep you from the college football playoff. I don't know what Jaden Daniels are going to get this year, but I have been impressed by what the things that he did this past year. But you got to build upon it in year two. The second thing that I think could be a huge factor to propel LSU to the college football playoff or hold them back is this transfer class. I think this transfer class is going to be so key for LSU this year because this transfer portal class is going to be filling in really, really important holes. Let's look at the defensive line, for example. You've got Mason Smith coming back, which it's really easy for us to just say, oh, Mason Smith is coming back. Let's not forget that an ACL can be a tricky injury. Let's not forget that Mason Smith hasn't played football for almost a year now, or once the season rolls around, it will be a year. So will Mason Smith be 100%? I don't mean 100% as in cleared by a doctor. I mean 100% as in not only is he cleared by a doctor, but has he gotten all the strength in his leg back? Is he back at a competitive level that he came into last season with? That's another thing to keep in mind. But you've got Mason Smith, you got Mekhi Wingo, and then you've got a group of transfers coming in. And of course you have Savion Jones. Of course, you've got a solid group of guys that are already within that building that can help your team out right away. I mean, Jacoby and Guillory is another one that can help your team out. But you've also got a massive group of transfers. Jalen Lee from Florida, Paris Shand from Arizona, Braden Swinson from Oregon, Ovia Gufo from Texas, that can help your team out and can help build and boost up this defensive line after losing BJ Ojolari, Jaquelin Roy, and Ali Gay. Those are all question marks at the defensive line. Mekhi Wingo, he's not a question mark. Mason Smith's knee, that is a little bit of a question mark. But these transfers, they're question marks. I don't know how they're going to be able to bridge that gap from 22 to 23. Especially considering your defensive line coach just went to the NFL. So the transfers on the defensive line, I'm looking at the transfers in the secondary as well. How are those guys like a Zay Alexander or a Denver Harris or a Deuce Chestnut? How are those guys going to be able to build up the secondary? It's something that I've asked several times of. Matt House was able to do what I didn't think was possible last year, and that was pick up all of these pieces out of the transfer portal from all different defensive schemes, all different areas of the country with all varying levels of experience and bring them together and, one, make them a cohesive unit, and two, make them a really efficient and effective cohesive unit. Matt House was able to do that last year. Can you do that again? This talent coming in this transfer portal class, I would say, is probably a step up from this past season. And that's no disrespect to the Jarek Bernard Converses of the world, but it is just, you're looking at the transfers last year, comparing it to 4s and 5 stars. It's just inherently there's more talent coming in. How can Matt House work with this new group for the second year in a row? All question marks I have. If you've listened to this podcast, nothing gets my underwear in a wad quite like special teams was last year. How can Aaron Anderson, a transfer from Alabama, come in and bolster up the talent on special teams? All areas that LSU either strived in last year and are struggling in going to this year, or struggled with last year and are trying to build up going to this year. That's going to be, for the most part, in the hands of transfers. How can transfers help out your class this season? And the last thing, the final thing that I think could either help LSU and propel LSU to a college football playoff or hold LSU back from a college football playoff is something that I want to get into coming up next. So the final thing, I think that the three things that I've already mentioned, the three things that I think could be in the way, get in the way of LSU making the college football playoff and not. More specific to LSU, because I think there's always things that play a factor, but specific to LSU. One, the schedule. You got a tough schedule. Every year is going to be a tough schedule. You play in the SEC West, but you open up your season in Orlando against Florida State, a team that everyone's very high on. A Florida State team that's returning a whole bunch of talent, a starting quarterback, a head coach that outperformed expectations last year in Mike Norvell. The quarterback. Well, Jaden Daniels are you going to get every single year? And also the transfer class, especially in the positions where LSU needs depth the most. But I think the final thing, which I think this applies to any team in any sport at any level, that could be the difference between you getting to a championship and you being held back, between you reaching expectations and you falling short of them. I think it applies to anyone, but it applies here too. And that's Brian Kelly. It's the coach and the quarterback, the two most important factors to any football team from, little league to high school to college to the NFL to the XFL to the USFL, CFL. The coach and the quarterback are the most important things. There were several in-game decisions, tactician moves, if you will, that Brian Kelly made this past season that were questionable, in my opinion. Going for 2 against Texas A&M. Didn't understand it. Didn't understand it for a single second. You weren't going to be in the lead if you went for 2. You weren't going to tie the game if you went for 2. You weren't in the final few seconds of the game or minutes of the game, and you needed to go for 2 in order to keep yourself in the game. I didn't understand that decision. Almost every decision Brian Kelly made against Tennessee didn't necessarily agree with. Harold Perkins was on the sideline for a majority of that Tennessee game, and Brian Kelly's explained it that they nickeled out against Tennessee, meaning that they opted for more members of the secondary rather than linebackers up front. Tennessee was a spread out offense. Tennessee would throw the long ball. I get it. I understand the sentiment that when you only have 2 linebackers available, you got B.J. Ojulari, your number 18, one of the most important players on your team playing on the outside, and you've got your inside linebacker, but Harold Perkins wasn't going to play that inside linebacker spot, but you keep Harold Perkins. So I get it. I understand it, but why keep Harold Perkins on the sideline? Harold Perkins at that point had proven that he was that dude, that he was a dog. And then throughout the rest of the season, when Harold Perkins is single-handedly beating Arkansas for you, it makes that decision look even dumber. So there are some questionable decisions that Brian Kelly made throughout the season that caused me to scratch my head. Now, no coach is going to be perfect, and it's really easy to kind of be an armchair coach. When I'm watching the game from my couch and I'm not in the middle of it, I'm not making these decisions, and then it doesn't work out, it's easy for me to critique those decisions. And it's really easy for me to praise the decisions that do work, like going for 2 at the end of the Alabama game. I thought that was a brilliant move from Brian Kelly. I also still would have thought that was a brilliant move from Brian Kelly, even if they hadn't gotten the 2-point conversion. Even if they had lost that game to Alabama, but they tried going for 2, I still would have praised him for it because I still think it was a good idea, just the execution wasn't right. Even if LSU had beaten Tennessee, I still think it would have been a dumb idea to keep Harold Perkins on the sideline. Even if LSU would have beaten Texas A&M, still think in that time of play, and the way that LSU was playing at that point, that going for 2 was a dumb decision. And then you got your starting quarterback injured. And you can't predict those kind of things, but it's just a cherry on the top of that decision. So I think that Brian Kelly's in-game decisions could be the difference between wins and losses, a college football playoff berth, and maybe not a college football playoff berth. That's the same for any coach in America. That's the same thing for any team in America. You need to trust your signal callers. You need to trust your head coach for some of the decisions that they make, whether that be personnel decisions, who's starting at what position and for what games, whether that be decisions like going for 2 or not going for 2, whatever those decisions might be. You need to trust your head coach in doing that. Brian Kelly made some that I disagree with last year. I don't know if that is a matter of sometimes they're just going to work and sometimes they're just not. Sometimes you're going to go for 2 against Texas A&M at a dumb time in the game, and you're not going to get it. Sometimes you're going to go for 2 against Alabama in overtime, and you're going to beat Alabama, and it's going to be one of the greatest environments in Tiger Stadium since 2019. Sometimes things work and some things they don't. Sometimes that's just football. Or is it Brian Kelly getting acclimated to the style of SEC play, the speed of SEC play, learning his roster more, learning his players more, getting more accustomed into this role, because I know Brian Kelly's been coaching for like forever, for as long as I've been alive, but also you come into a new conference, you come into a new environment, you come into a new roster. The coach needs to get accustomed to that as well. So I don't know. I don't know if that's just what we're going to have to get used to with Brian Kelly. I don't know if that's just a learning curve with Brian Kelly, but your head coach is so important for so many reasons. A billion different reasons. How you practice, how you recruit, how you prepare for games. But being a tactician is one of the most important jobs that a head coach has, especially in a league where every single game matters, where every single play matters. Brian Kelly has made so many great decisions on the field, so many great decisions. He's also made some not so great ones too. Is that going to be the difference between a college football playoff berth and not? I hope not. But I think that's what it is. Quarterbacks, transfer class, schedules, and your head coach. Head coach is an umbrella of a million different things. I think LSU can make the college football playoff this year. Why not? Why not LSU? That's going to do it for me today. Thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen today. For your second listen, check out our brand new podcast, Locked On College Basketball. Experts Isaac Shaden and Andy Patton bring you everything that you need to know on and off the court. Plus, you can hear from big name experts, coaches, and players throughout the basketball landscape. Locked On College Basketball, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts.